Professor Dan Michman is head of the International Institute for Holocaust Research and Incubement of the John Nyman Chair of Holocaust Studies at Yad Vashem. He is an emeritus professor of modern Jewish history and the former chair of the Arnold and Leona Finkler Institute of Holocaust Research and Incubement of the Abraham and Edita Spiegel Family Chair in Holocaust Research at Bar Ilan University. Born in Amsterdam in 1947, he emigrated to Israel with his family in 1957. In 1978, he wrote his dissertation, Jewish Refugees from Germany in the Netherlands, 1933-1940. In 1976, he joined Bar Ilan University, teaching and researching in the field of modern Jewish history in general, and the Shoah in particular. His father, Joseph Michman, Dan Michman, served as the general director of Yad Vashem from 1957 till 1960 and testified at the Eichmann trial.
My name is Dan Michman. My father Hebraized our name from Melkman originally into Michman, and I'm head of the International Institute for Holocaust Research of Yad Vashem and emeritus professor of modern Jewish history with a focus on the Holocaust at Bar Ilan University, Ramat Gan, Israel. My parents survived the Holocaust. They were born in Amsterdam, and they were deported in 1943, first to Westerbork and then to the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. They were liberated in eastern Germany by the Red Army and returned to the Netherlands. And first of all, they had to find my brother, who was hidden. Right? And then there were other relatives because my grandmother and two aunts were exchanged in 1944 for Germans, Templars from Eretz Israel, from Palestine. And one of these aunts had a boy who was hidden in the Netherlands. So they tried to trace him and found him and brought him then also back. And they took in the two children of my aunt, who were also hidden, and so they had to rebuild the family and to rehabilitate themselves, and then they also contributed to the reconstruction of the Dutch Jewry. My father was head of the Zionist Federation in the Netherlands. He was also the editor of the Jewish Weekly, the NIV. He learned and also made inquiries. There's, for instance, a very infamous affair that happened in the Netherlands, and that was the case of Anneke Beekman. Anneke Beekman was a child that was hidden by two Catholic women, and they didn't want to return the child. And there was a whole inquiry, and they smuggled the child out of the Netherlands, and she's still living in the south of France. But that was a whole affair in the Netherlands, and my father was involved also through the Jewish community. And it was even so that the police came to the home where Anneke Beekman was hidden for a while, and they found a warm bed. She was taken just minutes before outside the home and smuggled out of the country. So my father was involved in all these issues and new aspects of the war orphans and perpetration and the people who chaired the Jewish Council and so on and so forth. We came to Israel in 1957 when my father was appointed as Director General of Yad Vashem, and therefore he was well known to the prosecution here as a prominent person who knows about the Holocaust in the Netherlands. And after Eichmann was captured and brought to Israel and the trial was prepared, people of the prosecution, actually Attorney Gabriel Bach, came to our home to ask my father if he would be ready to testify in the trial. And actually, my father told that he hadn't met Eichmann personally, but he knew, of course, a lot about the Holocaust in the Netherlands, also from his personal experience and from his position at Yad Vashem later on. And so he was recruited as the witness for the case of the Netherlands in the Eichmann trial. I think that testimonies in trials of criminals of the Holocaust, and of course also in other cases of genocide, play an important role. This was not the case already during the Nuremberg trials. The number of witnesses was very limited. Only later on, this changed, and the Eichmann trial was very important in this. Because there was a series of people who testified in the trial, and although the documentation was for the trial itself at that moment much more important, for the public resonance of the trials, this was very important. But there is more to it, and that is also later on, because there are a lot of things that occurred during the Holocaust and occur also in other genocides that are not documented. That's the nature of these kind of things. And so when you have testimonies, that is very important, especially if you have several testimonies, because together they can depict a picture that can be used also in the trial itself when documentation is lacking. And we can see that later on in trials in the 1970s and 1980s, already in the 1960s actually, this change occurred. And in recent years, it has been embraced much more. And we can see that for criminal cases, this can sometimes also be decisive. For instance, regarding the war in Yugoslavia in the 1990s. Testimonies are very important also for the public dimension of trials, because it's not a document, it's a person who tells about his or her experience, and that is of great importance for understanding, for the public to understand the seriousness of the cases. And I can tell that it is also important for research, for inquiry committees, and for scholars, for historians. One of the leading historians on the Holocaust is Christopher Browning, and he wrote already in 1992 a very important study, Ordinary Men, in which he used the testimonies of perpetrators of a police battalion, 101, that killed or was actually responsible for the killing of some 80,000 Jews. And now from their testimonies during the inquiry towards the trial, he learned a lot about the interaction between them and what happened and so on, things that you could not learn from the survivors. On the other hand, he also later on wrote a very important study on a forced labor camp in Poland, Starachowice, and there he used a lot of testimonies by survivors about the conditions in the camp and so on. And from them you could learn about the perpetrator, things that were not documented, not recorded, and also not told by the perpetrators themselves later on when they were arrested. So the role of testimonies is of great importance. Of course, you have always to take into account that memory can shift things and cannot be always so precise. But if you have a cluster of testimonies that adds up and can complement documentation, and sometimes is the only way to understand what happened at a certain moment.